Today, we're going to talk about the NFL and their salary cap. So salary cap principles, just generally, what is the salary cap? The first salary cap was implemented in the mid-90s. Players really wanted true free agency. They wanted to be able to move and find a situation to better their career at their discretion. As part of a give back to achieve free agency, they agreed to institute a salary cap, a spending limit. So that way it wasn't just the wealthy clubs stockpiling players in the same way that college programs used to do that before there was a cap on scholarships. So way back then, 1994, the salary cap was a robust $34 million. This past year, it was $198.2 million. For 2021, the amount is still to be determined, and we'll see why here in just a second, but it's because the salary cap is agreed to each year between the league and the union, and it depends on revenue. So obviously in a pandemic, this creates an issue. So how do we determine that? And here's where I'm not going to really get into the weeds too much because there's a lot of ins and outs to it, and it doesn't matter that much right now. But we'll show that it's all revenue. And the main point is that the salary cap and the benefits that are owed to players and retired players come out of the bucket each year. The big driver of the salary cap is the national media ticket. And that's Fox, CBS, ESPN, DirecTV. In the future, it's probably going to be Amazon. All of those things make up the biggest part of the revenue. You can see it's 55% of what will probably be north of $6 billion in the next TV deal, which the league hopes to close this year. And then you can see the rest of how the buckets fill in. This is in stark contrast to Major League Soccer, where they are almost entirely dependent on match day. Ticket sales, merchandise sales, anything day of game, because their broadcast contracts pale in comparison. It's just a much smaller picture for them, okay? So going back to those player benefits, training camp per diem, dental costs, medical insurance, disability payments, all these things you can see on the screen. But the big one again is the pension and the health insurance, especially for retired players. That's become a very large issue very recently. But these benefits are critical, especially in a pandemic where the size of the benefits isn't decreasing. If anything, it's increasing, but revenues have reduced. So the only place that it can come out of is the salary cap. So they're expecting the salary cap ceiling to drop, by 15 million next year. And that's problematic because the salary cap has increased by 10 million bucks at least every year for the last several years. So if you're planning your roster and you are going to give, let's say, Deshaun Watson a contract, you did it expecting next year's cap to be somewhere around 210 million, and the year after to probably be about 225 million because of those new broadcast contracts we just spoke about. Okay, so hold that thought for just a minute. Now, the NFL roster size, there's 53 players on the roster during the regular season. This time of year, you can have upwards of 90, and that's all the way through the final cut on Labor Day. You can have an additional 12 players on your practice squad during the season. Their minimum has gone up quite a bit as well. If you're on the practice squad this year, you're making $156,000, which is almost double what it was just a few years ago. And it's actually going to increase even higher next in 2022. Okay, here are the minimum salaries. Okay, this has also gone up dramatically, and that's a product of the collective bargaining agreements. Your minimum salary is calculated by the number of credited seasons that you've earned. Okay, you earn a credited season by being on the active roster for 3 games. Now, this is different than an accrued season, which is how you get to free agency. We'll get to that in a second. So you can see the league minimum, if you've never played a snap in the NFL, is $660,000 this year. Okay, if you are a 7-year vet or more, your minimum is just under 1.1 million this year. Those amounts obviously increase each year. So again, that's problematic if your base salary for the league minimums have increased, but the salary cap has decreased. In the NFL, if your cap is still going to be 185 million or so, you can get by. Whereas in Major League Soccer, the salary cap has remained flat. And without the wiggle room that the NFL has, it's a real problem in MLS because you just can't make up ground the way that you can in the NFL. Okay, so let's look at how do we calculate a player's salary cap charge? And it's really based on 3 different things. What is the player's actual salary, his P5? And that's because in the NFL player contract, the salary is listed in the 5th paragraph in the document. And that's paid in equal installments over all 17 weeks. What is the player's signing bonus charge for that year? Signing bonuses or amounts treated like signing, which would be like an option bonus, those amounts are equally amortized over the life of the contract up to a maximum of 5 years. And then the other bucket is likely to be earned amounts, which are 90-man roster bonuses or incentives that are considered likely. So for instance, if a player has an incentive for, he gets $500,000 if he scores 10 touchdowns. And if he scored 10 last year, then starting at this beginning of the league year, that 500 grand is going to count on his cap. And then if he doesn't earn that over the course of the season, the 500 grand gets credited to the team's salary cap charge moving into next year. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. With regard to the roster, right now, the top 51 rule is in effect. And what that means is only the top 51 salaries count against the salary cap right now. And that's because this time of year, not every team has the same number of players signed. Some teams will have 78, some might have 88. That being said, any amounts of prorated signing bonus are on the cap right now. Any incentives deemed likely to be earned count right now, but only the top 51 salaries. And let's take a look at the salary cap as it stands today. So again, they still have the salary cap based on $198.2 million. And we know that's going to change. The other wrinkle here that's important to remember is very recently, in the last several years, the NFL and the NFLPA came to an agreement that allows clubs to carry over unused salary cap space into next season. That wasn't the case as recently as 2010, I think. And teams would have to be creative to come up with ways to carry the room over if they wanted to. Now the union just makes it easy and says, okay, all you have to do is send in a form and let everybody know how much you're carrying over. Okay, so what this does is it changes each club's actual salary cap. And we'll look at Jacksonville, right? Jacksonville, you'll see their adjusted club cap is almost $225 million, which is just incredible because they carried over $26.74 million that they didn't spend this year. If you couple that with the fact they only have 62 players under contract right now, they have almost $98 million in available salary cap room. Now that amount's going to come down a little bit when they finally set the cap at 185 or whatever. But you can see why that job was widely considered the best job available by prospective GM and head coach candidates, because you had the #1 pick in the draft, and everybody seems to believe you have a generational quarterback prospect. And then you have $85 million at least in salary cap room to spend. That is quite an appealing situation. You can look at these numbers a little bit more closely on your own when I leave this presentation with you, but you'll see You know, there are clubs right now. New Orleans is at least 70 million over the salary cap, and that's bad. And it will show why teams end up in the position that they are. Well, let's walk through in a salary cap accounting example here real quick, and then we'll show you a real world one. So let's say a player signs a 4-year contract with an $800,000 signing bonus. Okay, here are the salaries for his 4 seasons under contract: 5, 6, 7, 900,000. And then let's say the club gave him a $500,000 roster bonus in year 4, which is something an agent in the NFL would push for routinely. And as a club, you'd be really, really reluctant to give to the player. But let's see how we would actually account for it each year. Okay. You can see each salary across the board by year. And then that signing bonus is amortized over the length of the contract up to 5 years. So in this case, it's 4 years, right? The $200,000 a year. And then that likely to be earned amount in year 4, that's $500,000. Okay, so in year 1, his salary cap charge is 700, and then 8, 9, 1.6 million. Let's talk about dead money. So signing bonus proration always counts against the salary cap. And it was explained to me very early that you need to consider a signing bonus as an advance on future performance, services to be rendered. It's not free money, right? They're not doing it because they like you. It's because they expect you to perform to a certain level. And this is the best way to suit their accounting needs, right? So the dead money is the unamortized signing bonus that accelerates onto your cap when a player is released, or if the player is traded, because you've already paid the players, you have to account for it at some point, right? Again, just like the credit card, you already bought something, you do have to pay for it at some point. So obviously it's a massive penalty if you have a lot of dead money in your cap, because it's going to inhibit your flexibility to make other moves, whether it be free agency or even trading up in the draft in some cases. So the June 1 rule, and that's what comes into play a lot right now with teams weighing whether or not to release high-priced veterans. If you release or trade a player before June 1st, all of the unamortized signing bonus proration accelerates into the current league year. Okay, so that can be a very significant amount of money. If you wait till after June 1 to release the player, all of the unamortized money hits the cap next year, leaving only this current league's year charge on the books. Okay. The new CBA allows teams to do it twice now. It used to only be one, and they let you designate your player in March, which was a big win for the players. So you didn't have clubs squatting on veteran players all through free agency when, you know, the big money is being spent. The caveat to that is the player's charge counts on your salary cap until June 2nd. Okay, so here's how it would look using that same roster example. Okay, let's say we're releasing the player in 2002, but before June 1. Okay, so that $200,000 signing bonus charge for each year, the 2 years that the player's not on the roster accelerates into 2002. So that increases his cap charge to $600,000. But the $600,000 salary comes off the books. Okay. So that makes your dead money charge $600,000 because the player's gone, but you're still counting the 600 grand on your salary cap. Okay. Now, if you wait until after June 1, your salary cap charge this year is only going to be what? 200,000, because that 400,000 is going to wait to kick in until the next league year in 2023. Right? So here they both are.
Chase, one question that jumps to mind to me, and then I'm going to ask a question, or I'm going to have Zach Stern ask his question. So I guess it begs the question, as I'm looking at what you've described, and I appreciate you putting it out here because this visual helps me and helps the students. Obviously, you smooth things out if you wait until after June 1. So you would think, just from that perspective, if you're just focusing on the smoothing effect, that doing it post June 1 would be the optimal way to go. However, we've seen already, obviously, with the Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford situation. So in a situation like that, where they're not choosing to smooth things and they're doing a deal quickly, is that because there's just simply the fear that, like in the Rams case, if they don't make the move when they make it, that someone else gets Stafford? Is it as simple as that?
Well, there are a few things that come into play there, and the big one is the conveyance of draft choices, right? Because there are draft picks involved in that trade. And then also, I believe there was a roster bonus that was coming due. So they really had to move him quickly. And when you looked at the two players on the cap, it was almost a wash. There wasn't a lot of difference each way with regard to making that move. So I think that the other thing that really came into play was the compensation received for Stafford. I mean, I don't think you were going to find that deal anywhere else. So there was no real reason for them to wait if the money was going to be relatively similar. All right, so speaking of people that won out, let's take a look at Deshaun Watson real quick, okay? He signed a new contract just back in September, and it was a 4-year extension, making it a 6-year contract in total. And on the extension, it was $39 million a year, which was the second highest in the NFL, behind only Patrick Mahomes, who's at $45 million. They gave him $73 million guaranteed at signing, but only a $27 million signing bonus. However, they did give him a no trade clause, which is problematic now for the team because your face of the franchise wants to be traded, but now he has all the leverage because he can just veto whatever trade you put together if he doesn't want to go to Cincinnati or something like that. So it really reduces the team's leverage and really helps the player sort of pick his destination. So let's look at the ramifications of moving him before or after June 1st. Okay, and I'll give you the answer to the question. It's 21.6 million in dead money right now, as opposed to if they wait till after June 1st, it's 5.4 this year and 16.2 next year. Okay, and here's why. So here's his contract. Okay, this is what it looks like. This is called the ECRS, the Electronic Contract Reporting System. This is how every contract in the NFL gets submitted. So it's a standardized accounting system. All right, and you can see here, his salary cap charge for each year is only $5.4 million. Because they gave him a relatively modest $27 million signing bonus. That's because they guaranteed the first 3 years' salaries and then gave him a guarantee in the 4th year that conveys to a full guarantee. So what I would have expected them to do is, you can see that 3rd year salary at $35 million. They would have converted that money into another signing bonus. Because again, 2022 is when these savvy clubs would have been expecting the salary cap to skyrocket. So they would have been using 2022 as their bank, so to speak. Figure out how much salary cap room they need additionally, and then move that money into a signing bonus. That will stand in stark contrast to the next example we'll look at, Russell Wilson. So recently, in what seems to be a little bit out of character for Russell Wilson, seems to be a little bit more vocal about his displeasure with the roster, with the organization, So the obvious question is, does he want out? Let's take a look at his contract. Executed just back in 2019, another 4-year extension. But in 2019, his contract was $35 million a year, and he was the highest paid player in the NFL. So you can see how quickly they left that contract in the dust. So back to Zach's question, it doesn't matter to these new players or these players eligible for new contracts what the salary cap is. The players are going to get their money. Seattle made him the highest paid player in the league. They gave him $70 million guaranteed at signing, a record of $107 million, and an NFL record $65 million signing bonus, which is really unbelievable. But similarly, they gave him the same no trade clause. So now, again, if he does drop the hammer and say he wants to go, leave Seattle, where's he going to go? And where Seattle gets hurt even more is because of that structure, the $65 million signing bonus. It would leave them $39 million in dead money for 2021 in a year where the salary cap's dropping due to the pandemic. This is a player that would have to be a June 1 move for the club because they likely just couldn't afford it. So similarly, let's look at his contract. The opposite of Watson, the salaries are relatively modest, but you have that massive signing bonus. And the other issue here is they gave Russell a significant amount of potential escalators in that 5th year based on his performance and Pro Bowls, etc. He's already achieved quite a few of them. So to franchise him in 2024, already it'll cost them $48 million, which is a massive first-year franchise number. And we'll get to the franchise tag here in just a second. So how do you become a free agent? You need to have 6 or more regular season games to earn an accrued season. And then you become an unrestricted free agent by having 4 of those accrued seasons. If you only have 3 at the completion of your contract, you're a restricted free agent. However, your club can issue a franchise tag and really restrict your movement. So let's look at the franchise tag. The non-exclusive franchise tag is the average of the 5 largest salaries from the previous year for players at your position, okay? And they take a 5-year total of that and they divide it by the sum of the salary caps for the previous 5 years. They come up with a percentage and you multiply that by the current year's salary. And I'll show it to you in a graphic form so it's easier to understand. This amount, as soon as the player signs his franchise tag, it's guaranteed. So the team can't remove it. The exclusive franchise tag is the average of the 5 highest salaries, regardless of position. Okay, and this means the player cannot negotiate with another team. You can't go anywhere. A non-exclusive tag, if a club wants to send 2 first-round picks to the club in exchange for a franchise player, they can do that. So here's what it looks like. Okay, here you would take, if this was 2018, for example, you would take the sum of the previous 5 years, what those individual tags were, and then you would divide that by the sum of the previous 5 years salary caps to come up with the percentage for what your current year's tag is going to be. Okay, so it sounds confusing, but in practice, it's really not that bad. And then this past year, here are your non-exclusive franchise tags. This brings us to Dak Prescott. Okay. Dak Prescott, 4th-round draft pick for the Dallas Cowboys and a quarterback. We talked about the rookie pool previously. It's a rookie wage scale. Dak had absolutely nothing to really negotiate in his contract. So he was basically stuck. And that's a problem for him because he turned out to be a starting quarterback in his rookie year, started every single game for the first 3 years, made 2 Pro Bowls in that time, easily made him the most valuable player in football. the best bargain. Not saying he's the best player in football, but when it comes to value and when it comes to what you think you can earn, they're two very different things, right? So signing bonus, again, per the wage scale was, only $383,000. And then he made the league minimum for the first 3 years. After year 3, you're eligible to negotiate a new contract. So again, in the 4th year, he knew he was going to make $2 million. It was the maximum amount allowed pursuant to the rookie wage scale. So he had a choice. And the club, from the other perspective, has the same choice. Do you try and re-sign the player after 3 years, or do you let him play it out, see what happens, and then you have to franchise him or find a new quarterback? So look at it this way. Through the 3rd year, Dak had earned on the field just over $2 million. He knows in year 4, his base salary alone is going to double that. Okay, so if you haven't made big NFL star money yet in your career, that's not nothing. It's a big deal. From the agent's perspective, that either you're going to hit the open market after 2019, or they have to franchise tag you. So the agent starts doing the math on what is it going to cost the club to keep my player for the next couple of years. And this is the way the agents always spin it to you, okay? Because the franchise tags amounts, you know what it is in the first year, and then each year it builds on top of that. And the percentage increases are in the CBA. So you know what it's going to cost. For them to tag Dak twice, the average value is almost $30 million, which at the time would have made him about the 6th highest paid player in the league, tied with Matt Ryan. However, through 3 tags and the way agent math works, he's going to say it's $35 million a year to tag him, which is the highest paid player in the league. Nobody's ever been franchise tagged 3 consecutive years by their club. So it's an unrealistic scenario. But on paper, the agent's going to tell you, look, this is the math. This is how much it's going to cost you. I can show it to you. So if you're the agent after the 3rd year, are you going to advise your player to accept a deal with the club, because they certainly made offers, and the offer at the time was in the $25 million a year range? And we knew that in Atlanta because the agent represented about half of our roster at the time. What are you willing to accept, knowing what the club owes you, right? So it's really the mitigation of risk. It's the same thing Kirk Cousins went through. How much risk are you willing to take as a player, that you're going to get through the year healthy and continue to perform at the level that would make you a desired free agent on the open market? From the club, it's the same conversation from the other perspective. What are you going to offer? What do you think the player's mindset is? And then what's your ceiling? What can you live with for this player? Well, Dallas went the other route entirely, and they gave him the exclusive franchise tag, which meant that the player is absolutely not going anywhere, right? He can't even negotiate with other clubs. So what this does, it just raises the price dramatically. So obviously, Dak Prescott opted to play out his contract. And as the agent, that was his goal the entire time, wanted to take his player to the open market. So now, as soon as you've been franchised, everything's different. The calculus is different. The amount of money you're expecting on your extension is different, because they tagged him once last year. He got hurt, but this year, no matter what, to keep him, they have to pay him a 1-year deal for over $37 million, or let him go become a free agent. Next year, he either gets to be a free agent, sign a new deal, or they have to pay him $54 million. So you can see how the math changed considerably. So from the club's perspective, you want to keep your quarterback. What is the price you're going to pay for that security to let yourself off the hook for that $54 million salary cap charge next year? You know, do you know that you can find a better option for a price that's cheaper than Dak will accept? You know, I don't know how, from the club's perspective, they could confidently say yes, that, yeah, we're confident we can find somebody to give us the same level of performance at a better rate. So for the agent, you know, what's enough? You know, you've got about 46 million a year coming in the next 2 years. You know, the club's not going to tag you the third time. But realistically, at that point, what can you expect, you know, now versus next year? And it's changed a little bit because of the pandemic. So really, you have to figure out, you know, what can the player live with? And now, because the player's pocketed that $31.5 million, he's going to be much more amenable to finding an agreement on a contract, especially now that the top of the market has moved. He's not going to get that 45 million, but now he might very well be over 40 million. And that doesn't mean that he's the second best quarterback in the league or the second most valuable, but that's what happens, right? You played hardball with the guy and you couldn't get the contract done. So you paid $31.5 million for the privilege to give the guy a larger contract this year than he would have been asking for 2 years ago. So it's all about the mitigation of risk. And in this case, you know, Dallas gambled, and even though the player got hurt, it looks like the player is going to come out significantly ahead because his cost is fixed by the tag, even if the salary cap reduces. Because he got tagged once, by rule, his salary goes up 120%, regardless of where the cap sets.